Hi everyone, my name is Monet Lycett, and today we'll be talking about lactate metabolism and the Cori cycle. We're going to pull open some resources and take a look and discuss how lactate moves between muscle and the liver, and how exercise intensity influences this pathway, and how lactate contributes to both energy production and fatigue during exercise. So let's approach this as if we know nothing about the Cori cycle or lactate shuttle or lactate in general. So we will be approaching this from the beginning, starting from the top and addressing the major steps of the lactate pathway. So during higher intensity exercise, glycolysis in the working muscle increases in order to meet rising energy demands. Glucose at that point is then broken down into pyruvate, and when the mitochondria cannot process pyruvate quickly enough, it is converted into lactate through the enzyme LDH, which is lactate dehydrogenase, LDH. This process is important because it regenerates NAD, allowing glycolysis to continue to produce ATP, which is essential for exercise and muscle function. Once lactate is formed, it does not simply accumulate in the muscle and stay in the muscle. Instead, it is transported out of the muscle fibers and into the bloodstream through MCT, which is the monocarboxylate transporters. Um, this movement of lactate between tissues is known as the lactate shuttle. When lactate reaches the liver, it is converted back into pyruvate and then used to form glucose through the process of glucogenesis. This process does require energy, which is why we see that there is a cost looking at the diagram of 6 ATP molecules in the liver. The newly formed glucose afterwards is then released back into the bloodstream and transported again into the muscle, where it can be used again for energy production. This entire process is known as the Cori cycle, this whole recycling process. And what it tells us is, in the end, lactate is not just a waste product. It does serve a key role and function. It does have metabolic value and serves as an intermediate that helps maintain energy production throughout exercise. As we look at this graph, it's detailing the exercise intensity and training adaptation. So when we take a look at this graph, we can see that the activity of the lactate pathway, it changes depending on exercise intensity. So at lower intensities, lactate production and clearance of lactate remain relatively balanced, which means that blood lactate levels stay pretty stable, and lactate can actually be used efficiently as a fuel source by the body. But once exercise intensity increases, glycolytic flux and lactate production begins to exceed the body's ability to remove it at a decent pace. So, this is typically associated with the lactate threshold, where we start to see a more rapid increase in blood lactate levels. As intensity continues to increase and rise, we may reach a point at which we experience the onset of OBLA, which is the blood lactate accumulation, where lactate increases more sharply because production is outpacing clearance and drainage removal. Um, Training adaptations do play a major role in how efficiently this pathway functions. So, one easy way to break this down, or simpler way to break this down, is thinking of lactate as a sink. Um, as the flow of water into a sink. And so our body has the ability to allow the sink to drain. The water fills up the bowl of the sink, and at lower exercise intensities, the water flows out at the same rate that it comes in. It drains at the same time that the water flows in. And then as exercise intensity increases, it starts to get backed up. And the higher the intensity increases, the more backed up the sink gets. We do notice that with trained individuals or athletes, it is a little bit different. So endurance training, actually what it does is increases mitochondrial density and enhances oxidative enzyme activity, which improves the ability of muscle fibers to transport and utilize lactate through things like MCT transporters. And because of these adaptations, trained individuals and athletes are able to sustain higher exercise intensities before lactate accumulation rises significantly. And in layman's terms and practical terms, this means that improved performance is a result, and greater metabolic efficiency with more of like a delayed onset of fatigue during exercise is also a benefit. Now that we have discussed how lactate accumulation changes with exercise intensity, it is also important to point out and address a common misconception about lactate and fatigue. One thing we do need to address is the idea that lactate is the bad guy. And many people refer to lactic acid as the cause of muscle fatigue. But under physiological conditions, lactic acid does not remain intact for very long. It dissociates, dissolves, splits very quickly into hydrogen ions and lactate. And it is primarily, and the majority of the burn and the fatigue comes from hydrogen ions rather than lactate. Um, And the hydrogen ions are responsible for lowering pH, creating acidosis, and again, once again, contributing to that burning and that fatigue feeling during high intensity exercise. Lactate acid or lactate plays an important metabolic role. It can be transported to oxidative muscle fibers and even the heart, where it can be used as a fuel source directly. It can also travel to the liver and be converted back into glucose, as we have learned with the Cori cycle. This whole process, the cycle, highlights that lactate is not simply just a waste product, but rather an important energy shuttle that helps sustain ATP production during exercise. And because of this, fatigue during these intense exercise bouts, it's not caused by lactate alone, once again. But instead, it reflects a combination of factors, including changes in pH, metabolic stress, and other cellular processes which are coming next. We've reached the cellular factors that influence exercise cessation point in our presentation. Um, Lactate is normally blamed as the main cause of fatigue, but research does show that exercise cessation is actually influenced by multiple cellular and neural factors that work together. And the diagram highlights both central and peripheral mechanisms that contribute to fatigue. From a peripheral standpoint, some metabolic changes that occur within the muscle fiber during high intensity exercise include increased hydrogen ion concentration, which lowers pH and interferes with enzyme activity, um, and cross bridge cycling. And inorganic phosphate accumulation may also reduce force production by impairing calcium sensitivity within the muscle. And also, disruptions in calcium handling within the sarcoplasmic reticulum can also limit excitation contraction coupling, which means that the muscle is less able to generate strong contractions, even when there is a neural signal present. There are also central factors involved. The motor cortex and nervous systems regulate neural drive to the muscle, and as perceived effort increases, the brain may reduce activation as a protective mechanism, which contributes to what we described as perceived fatigability. And a real life example would be when I go to do my leg day at the gym and I decide to start off with a single leg Romanian deadlift, and I know that that's going to require a lot from my central nervous system. I don't save it for the end. I normally do it toward the beginning of my workout routine for that day. And just because of this reason, there is a demand on our central nervous system and something that we don't want to overlook. But there are multiple reasons as to why this this would be something that we would do in the beginning. In the end, ultimately, fatigue is multifactorial. It's not just one thing at a time, and lactate itself is not the direct cause of exercise failure, but rather one component in a complex physiological system involving metabolic stress, neural regulation, and cellular signaling. And hopefully, I've helped clear up a little bit of maybe not so much confusion, but ironing things out. Thank you.